Great. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for our Lineate webinar series. Today, we are going to talk about our recent merger with NextGate and specifically Enterprise Master Person Index and what that means for our customers and our prospects. I am Michelle Blackmer. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Lineate, and I'm joined by my colleague, Danny Seiden. Danny, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Danny Sedone. I was up until the merger with NextGate the Chief Technology Officer, and I've transitioned into the Innovation and Emerging Technology group of Lineate. So really excited to talk about the various initiatives we have and how these various products are going to work together going forward.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it too. And so before we dive in, a few housekeeping notes. You are all muted today, and we'll take questions through the chat. We really encourage you to ask any questions. We'll be fielding them throughout the call and trying to make this an interactive discussion. At the end of the session, within 24 hours, we'll distribute a recording of the presentation. And at that time, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. With that, we will dive in. What we plan to cover today, we're going to talk about the benefits of having a master person index, a little bit about the NextGate solution, why we chose as Lineate NextGate specifically to deliver Enterprise Master Person Index capabilities, and then some case studies. You know, I think it's really always helpful for attendees to hear about why their peers have chosen to work with Lineate and with NextGate and what that means for them and what the drivers are. So when we think about, you know, Master Person Index, and specifically this NextGate by Lineate solution, there's so many drivers that are requiring a single view of each person, kind of regulatory compliance, M&A. You know, Danny, what have you and the NextGate team learned is creating a need for this Master Person Index capability?
Yeah, this has been since the time that we started with this, and it's longer than I care to admit. Well, maybe I should just admit it. It's been about 20 years of working in this. It has remained largely unchanged in terms of the challenges, though I would say the last 5 or 10 years has been kind of amplification of these trends. So what started off as really kind of deduplication and management of data within local facilities and organizations broadened out into really the sharing of data across organizations. So for example, various providers of care that are networked together, or providers needing to communicate with payers, and then the kind of broader ecosystem of health IT that needed to be able to consume this information. And it's really been a longstanding problem that it's been very difficult to produce this single view of individuals that are being, where their data is being communicated across these various silos of information. So really the challenges going forward only get amplified because the scope of the sharing is increasing, and there's also more of a tendency now towards telemedicine and getting treated outside of the traditional confines of a hospital or a clinic. This is kind of consumerization of healthcare. So all of these trends are just kind of further amplifying this fundamental problem that there is no source of truth about people's identity.
Yeah, that makes that's been my experience, and for our customers, I know we have a mix of prospects, customers, NextGate customers, Lineate customers on the line. How will we jointly accelerate the benefit of implementing a master person index?
This is, one thing that we discovered is when we were just NextGate and we were focused really primarily on these registries, patient and provider registries. One of the areas that we always, quite frankly, struggled with was the integration, because in order to stand up an EMPI effectively, you have to be extremely well connected into the organization. There are many, many feeds, sometimes hundreds, that are feeding information across these various systems, and it's a kind of bi-directional thing. So we largely relied on our customers to have some integration technology in place in order to do this. This was usually the best strategy, to say, you guys are familiar with your integration, engines and the way that your data flows work. So we're just going to piggyback on that. Um, this was a good strategy, but it was a strategy that meant that the onus was on the customers and the users of the EMPI and our provider registry as well to do the formatting, do the massaging of the data, and basically do the integration. And we always wanted to have this integration capability in the product, but we knew that that's a separate company in and of itself. And so it's really nice to kind of see these things come together in a more integrated way, because it's something where we always wanted to offer this kind of full like a full service type of capability, and now we can do that with these products coming together.
Yeah, integration, one thing we see, integration sort of the longest part of many of these types of projects, right? And so
Yes.
it'll be nice to accelerate that, and we will, especially for people who are already using Rhapsody and CorePoint or who plan to use Rhapsody or CorePoint. I'm excited too about being able to deliver to the marketplace a managed service where, integration and identity both get resolved to help solve these problems. Because the shortage, not everyone can. I know that healthcare is having a hard time kind of scaling with all of the
Well,
demands.
they have other things that they need to focus on,
Yeah, exactly.
and I think, quite frankly, they would love it if this was a service just like the internet or the electrical outlet or something. It's just you plug in a bunch of things and they can deal with other problems, which is what they really should do. So we're slowly getting to that point.
Awesome. Looks like we might have a question here. Oh, so as an EMPI customer, let's talk about integration benefits for the NextGate customers. And so what will, how do you think about this for the NextGate customers who've been using Master Person Index, using their integration engine? Does the life change for them at
Well,
all, or
it doesn't have to. It certainly doesn't have to. Our system was always architected to be neutral in the sense that it exposed a series of services that various applications could authenticate and send. But I think that there may be many of our customers that would choose to migrate their existing integration onto this, because it will provide them all the benefits that Rhapsody and CorePoint have in terms of visibility of the data streams, being able to control the flow of data, to be able to archive messages. There's a lot of stuff that may or may not exist with whatever integration engine that our customers have used, and it is a complex undertaking to plug in an EMPI, and so that complexity, you really need some serious software to manage it, and certainly CorePoint and Rhapsody fit that description.
Got it. So no rush to upgrade, but certainly a possibility for enhancing. Awesome. And then, I think it's interesting. We look at the EMPI space has been getting more coverage. We went through a phase where EMPI, Gartner had sort of said, oh, this is commoditized. There's no innovation happening. And now in recent years, I think because of the drivers we were talking about at the beginning of the call, we're seeing a resurgence in CIOs recognizing we really do need an enterprise master indexing solution, and Lineate was seeing that. And so, why did we choose NextGate among the market space? And I know for us, we really were impressed by the flexibility of the solution, the global footprint that you have supporting customers around the world, already having both high trust and ISO certification, and the provider registry and directory, which I think we should talk more about. And then especially I was particularly intrigued by kind of your approach to bringing the consumer into the data stewardship process. So how is that in line with how you all have thought about your differentiation, or anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, certainly. I think just like we saw with integration engines, where there was kind of this notion of, well, maybe it's a commodity and maybe you could use open source things, and people would kind of try out these kind of simpler applications, and maybe they would have some success on the beginning of it, but then once it's scaled out, then they realize, oh, it's really not a commodity. There really are features that these other solutions, provide. So CorePoint and Rhapsody highly ranked in class. Back when the EMPI was ranked by class, we were #1 in class as well. And there's reasons for that, and in the case of the EMPI, the way that people tended to think of it as a commodity, and it was always a challenge to communicate this during presentations, is it's not just about the matching. I mean, the matching obviously is an important piece of it. If you can't match records effectively, if you can't match them accurately, then you're going to cause problems. But if you look at where our product development was over the last, 5, 6, 7 years, it's really been about looking at the EMPI, and as you said, also provider registry, we'll get to that, but looking at the EMPI as a data governance tool. So this is kind of like your central switchboard where every single application that is talking or communicating about a patient is sending data through this switchboard. And so it gives you really this unprecedented capability to have visibility on how these various applications and systems and facilities understand or have a view on the patient. And so then you start to see all the discrepancies, in various data elements, and you can drive certain data governance within the organization. For example, this application is not consistently capturing phone numbers, or this one has inconsistencies in how addresses are formatted. And you provide this, and this can kind of improve the overall efficiency of the organization. So, I think that's how we looked at it, that we continued to provide additional features that kind of drove it beyond just, the matching of data. As you say, we did have a lot of experience working outside of the United States. There's some significant projects that we did in Australia and in England, even in France, in Scotland. And these were all very useful because these are different models of healthcare. And it did kind of force us to have a more flexible approach, in how our system was architected, which kind of goes to your first bullet point, which I think is very much in line with Rhapsody and CorePoint as applications that can be offered on premise all the way out to a fully managed solution. On the last bullet point, the consumer approach is really what we started to work on in the last couple of years, and we're going to continue to do that. And this is really the idea that, as I was saying in the beginning, we've been at this for 20 plus years, and we've been basically doing things in the same way, and this is kind of like the way automakers have been basically using the same technology that was invented, back in 1900 to drive an automobile, and now finally they're looking at different modes of propulsion. And I think that for us, the key thing is that we have to start to involve the actual subject that's being represented in the EMPI, the patient, the member, the consumer. And we could talk about that further, but I'll leave it at that. It's kind of just a high level message around why we're going there.
Awesome. And one of the, when we were preparing for this, we were talking a bit about, as we talked, one of the benefits of Lineate is that we like to say, we meet customers where we are. You just alluded to this with CorePoint and Rhapsody, and even Envoy. The nuances of customer needs are really important to us, and whether they want to currently deploy on-prem or in the cloud or run as a managed service, or they have a preference toward Microsoft or Unix. And we recognize, as you were saying, the flexibility that healthcare demands. And one of the things that appeals about NextGate is that that's kind of an approach that you've taken as well to meet customers where they are with, flexible deployment options. I think, recognizing with the master patient index, also the need to understand who providers are and to help that data be correct as well.
Sure. Well, yeah, there was, there's less diversity out there than there used to be in terms of systems, but we had everything from, every flavor of Unix to Solaris and HPUX and all sorts of crazy stuff. That's kind of, kind of narrowed itself down now to basically Linux and Windows systems. But yeah, we tried to meet the customer wherever they were. Maybe we overdid it even, I would say, and that gives us a lot of flexibility, though clearly I think that the strategy going forward is to try to encourage people to move into the cloud, into a fully managed service, so that really at the end of the day, it reduces their total cost of ownership, and it ensures that they will have uh, a highly reliable and efficient implementation that they don't really have to manage much on their own. The provider registry is an interesting one because we took the same concept of being able to take different streams of information about a provider, whether it's from a credentialing app or from a national database like NPES, and to give the ability to correlate those together. And in the last couple of years, also what we introduced was a provider directory. So it gives the capability to publish that kind of massaged view or consolidated view of a provider to a
Like on my
searchable directory.
website. Oh, okay.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Um, so, that's been an interesting development, and I think that we're going to see more adoption of that as some of the government mandates around accurate provider directories, really get enforced.
Yeah, I think so. Like if if you're looking for a cardiologist within 5 miles of your house, you want to be able to find that information really easily, right? And not waste time
Absolutely. Yep.
going to calling. I just recently was trying to find a PCP, and the exercise of calling, I had a block of time in my day to try to call and find one. And you call, oh, not accepting new patients, not accepting new patients, and
Right.
it's really hard to find someone who is a good match. So
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
that's important. All right. Well, we did get one of the questions we got from the audience. Is there an option for we use Rhapsody today? Can we upgrade? Can we get access to NextGate? And of course, absolutely, you can purchase NextGate as well to run alongside of Rhapsody. And so if you reach out to your account manager, they'll be able to help you get the specifics and figure out how to do that. So let's double click into the solution. We're getting a few questions along this vein. I bring up this slide first to illustrate the entire, interoperability suite that Lineate offers to connect healthcare organizations and their trading partners, and to not only connect, but to ensure that there's accurate and reliable data making its way to the people who need it. So we talked a little bit about Rhapsody, CorePoint, Envoy, our integration solutions. And Rapid, which is an API gateway, and then NextGate, the master person index and provider registry and directory. And we should double click in there. Really our goal, and hopefully our customers feel this, is to facilitate these connections and make sure that they're not only connecting, but like I said, that they're accurate and reliable. Anything you would add along that vein, Danny, before we dive in?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of a general direction that Lineate is going on, and may, over the years, if folks join us, this will expand itself, to other areas where really it becomes kind of like a full stop or a full service shop, as I put it last time, where you can send largely unnormalized data, and at the output side of it, get a stream of data that code sets are properly managed, the position of data elements is managed, and with the NextGate in place, the patient and provider identity are normalized, and these are really important elements that will facilitate the communication between organizations. If we roll the clock back 25 years ago, when we started out at NextGate, this was actually a project that we had worked on at a different company that was to facilitate integration, basically to facilitate the translation of patient IDs. So what was then just kind of a simple project, we ended up creating a company around that. But the purpose of my story is just to say that that's really the genesis of the concept, was to aid in integration. So this is really just part of the toolkit that any healthcare organization needs to be effective.
Yeah, I think it makes so much sense. And for people who have connected Rhapsody to NextGate before the acquisition, they're using your web services. Will they continue to do that, or do you envision any? Yeah.
We've tried really hard over the years, especially over the last couple of major releases with version 10 and 11, to maintain backward compatibility. That has become, as the size of the customers goes up, then we really have to be very careful not to break anything, because quite frankly it becomes a major headache, right, to do upgrades otherwise. So no, there will be no massive changes that will require anyone to change their integration. I mean, unless it's something where they would like to transition from being on premise into the cloud, and they would like to leverage some additional integration type of capabilities such as Rhapsody and CorePoint along the way. We can support all of that. But if folks want to stay where they are, they certainly can do that.
And I think there's a question from the audience. I know you're leading innovation. You've been in that role for what, about 8 days or something?
3 weeks, but it feels like, yeah, right.
And they were asking, are we going to build any features into Rhapsody that will make integration with NextGate even easier? And I don't know if that's been,
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so at NextGate, our integration, our healthcare specific protocols were largely around the interoperability standards that the IHE were promoting. So things around the patient demographic query, patient identity feed. These were HL7 version 2 and version 3, and also some elements of FHIR in there. But we had a kind of very limited scope because we knew we were not going to become an integration engine company. But certainly with this merger, one of the main goals in the very short term here is to be able to jumpstart any Rhapsody or CorePoint customer in installing or in sending information or sending data to our EMPI. So you won't have to start from scratch. You won't have to do all the mappings and figure out the PID segment and whatever else that is kind of typically required. So absolutely, the answer is yes.
Awesome. Really great. Let's dive in. Let's talk more about how does an enterprise master person index work? And I know one of the common questions, and certainly it's been asked in the chat so far, is if I have Epic, and I know we're going to talk about a case study that's really relevant here, but if I have Epic, why do I need an EMPI? How does this work?
Yes, and that's also related to another question I think that I'm seeing, which is around the difference between what an EMR might have just generically and what NextGate EMPI is. I think the answer to that question is somewhat represented here, that many of these EHR systems, or just systems in general, if you think about it, really their approach to the universe is to model the actors involved in a transaction within their own data set. This is not a kind of decentralized concept. This is that if I'm an Epic customer, or if I'm a Cerner or Salesforce or whatever else is listed here, I exist within those systems. Almost universally, you will find that your identity as represented in those systems is unique to that system. And that's what these little numbers are showing there, just kind of in a almost shorthand, because usually these numbers are very long. They're kind of long sequential or half random or whatever. But the concept being that that's your kind of primary key, that's your handle to that individual within that system. And while some of these systems do support some capabilities, right, in consuming other identifiers and maybe other representations of an individual, they really almost universally don't do it very well. It's not the main thing that they were designed to do. The main thing they were designed to do was to deal with that individual within that particular system. And so that's where we introduced ourselves into the mix, that most of these, while these systems are not good at accepting data externally, they're really good at communicating what they are doing. So they're very chatty. So every time a transaction happens, they have to say something. It's kind of this egocentric almost view of the world where, I'm important, so I'm going to talk. So they talk a lot, and the talking was very helpful because they're all talking, like in this case, Sean Ryan is an example patient. They're all talking about this individual. They're not talking all that effectively between themselves, but they are talking. And so that's where the integration and the EMPI really becomes the critical element, where we listen to that chatter, And from that, we produce our single best record, which, to be quite honest, it's still pretty much kind of a single best guess. And we'll talk about how we're going to get it from a single best guess to a single best record, like a true single best record. But conceptually, it's the best that you can do with a bunch of chatty applications that aren't talking to each other is this sort of a model. So what we produce out of that is a single identifier. Hopefully, there are cases where it's not always clear, with a crosswalk to all the other identifiers and a best approximation of the demographics. And that's not something that you will find in a typical EMR.
And those updates go upstream and downstream from
Correct.
these.
Yes, and that's a good point, and another reason why integration is really important, because in addition to this kind of chatty flow on the inbound side, and by chatty, it could be millions of transactions a day, there's also a need to push information downstream. So for example, analytics applications would like to know when new patients are created, when IDs are modified in some way. That needs to be communicated so that when they roll up all of the data about patients and do their analytics, they're doing it on the most accurate version that there is. So yes, absolutely, it's bidirectional. Not exactly shown in this diagram, but
Yeah,
you're
yeah. No,
correct.
that's I heard a question the other day from a customer. They were describing kind of the health information management problem, and then as a secondary piece, saying, and this really hoses our data warehouse, which I think is the point you're just
Yeah.
making from analytics. So it's easy, I think top of mind to think about the front end patient experience, obviously, and patient safety, but then of course these problems perpetuate as they go downstream and manifest
Yes.
themselves in the warehouse in a way that
Yeah.
the insight's inaccurate.
Yep. Yeah.
Um,
Go ahead. Sorry.
was there any limit to the types of applications? I mean, I think I see here
We
Salesforce and the HIE.
No, none. Actually, this has broadened out over the years. At Salesforce, we've really seen quite a lot of that over the last couple of years, where call centers are being plugged in, and there's a kind of an issue in terms of how do you create a master of all of the customers, so that's a kind of an interesting avenue that things have gone in, and I think it only continues to expand. And that's really part of the reason why we came to the realization that, as much as we love our concept and our way of doing things, this is not the end goal. This is not the end state, or one would hope this isn't the end state, because at some point, it can scale, but it doesn't, there's always going to be some percentage of records that there are ambiguities on, and the only way to get this to a point where it's more deterministic in nature is to start to provide credentials to the patient themselves. And with everyone carrying their phone these days, this is something where people can carry their credentials, present their credentials, and there's not as much. It pulls away. Let me put it this way: the identity of an individual from being locked up in any one of these applications that you're seeing here as examples.
Always interesting, the conversation around who owns the data. When I hear you talk, it's like giving power to the consumer, I guess, right? Saying in this process of HIM figuring out the record, it sort of leaves the patient out of it, and you're championing, let's bring the patient into the process.
Yeah, it's a complex thing in the sense that a trust model has to be established, right? You can't just have any random person saying, "Oh, I'm such and so," and and just kind of the possibilities of fraud and abuse are sort of there. But with the appropriate checks and balances in place, it does become possible to responsibly give over ownership, if you will, of a person's identity to the individual. And all of these initiatives that talk about the end consumer being able to have access to whatever data a healthcare organization has. I mean, the only way that that's really going to happen is if you start to push your trust model outward, and you need to have very solid things in place in order to do that. Otherwise, you'll get yourself into a lot of trouble. But step one is really getting to a point of decentralized identity. This sort of a model, is the model that's been in place, here in the United States, and really pretty much everywhere, even in countries where they have a national identifier. You know, in England, for example, they still use an EMPI. They still have challenges where a person's identity is still kind of caught up in various systems. And so, you know, at some point, I hope 20 years from now, that we won't be looking at things this way. And that's why we're actively working towards the next generation. Even while we perfect this one, you know, it's kind of trying to do both at the same time.
That plus a question that we got, you know, we talked a lot about how this is how you still need an EMPI in the context of Epic. The question here is how it's different. And one of those ways is data stewardship, which I know we'll talk a bit about in the context of a case study. But I think it'd be helpful for the audience to understand how this facilitates that data governance or data stewardship in a way that's different than the EMR does.
Well, it provides a view that goes beyond just one individual system. And so if there's discrepancies of a person's identity across these multiple systems, it's possible to create reports, to also with our latest version, with some of the issue and task management, create tasks that somebody has to then act upon, you know, that would say, you know, this particular data element is missing or is incongruent with the other values that exist in different systems. So I think that the answer is that really the ability to go beyond a single system is what is the main differentiator
Like have that view of data from many systems in one place and
yeah,
be able
I mean,
to,
like some of our customers had upwards of 100 contributing systems, you know, so to be able to provide something that spans all of that, you know, you wouldn't be able to find that in any one of the individual systems.
Because the data stewards actually have an application in this context that lets them have that view.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. There are also, I want to acknowledge, there are some questions, you know, about like what does the merger, not just the technology, but you know, the synergy of bringing our teams together mean for people. And so we are, you know, we're really integrating the teams tightly from a professional services and a support. Those were two of the questions that arose in the chat. So CorePoint notoriously has #1 in class support. You mentioned NextGate was #1 in class when EMPI was covered there. So support for NextGate is also really important and really great. And the teams are joining forces and tend to continue to deliver best in class K and C, best in class support around the world to our customers. So you shouldn't feel any change, only you know, only improvements where maybe they're able to leverage skill sets across the teams.
Absolutely, yeah. We've started that process of kind of cross-pollination between the teams. Of course, it's going to take some more time, but that is the goal, that a kind of almost a combined services capability, because there is no project, at least from the MPI side, that doesn't have some integration need. Even if a customer is coming in with their own integration engine, there's a need to define all the specifications and the patterns that are going to be used to bring the data in. And from the integration side, there are, I wouldn't say every integration project is going to need an EMPI, but quite a few of them will. So, you know, the strategy really is to get to a team that is fully familiar on both sides of the equation.
Awesome. Yep. So there'll be cross-pollination to answer that question specifically. And then in terms of the ability to kind of reduce administrative overhead by combining agreements, you know, absolutely encourage you to work with your account management team, and they'll be able to help you find efficiencies on the contracting and administration side. And then, you know, earlier we were talking about integration with CorePoint and Rhapsody, and I see a question here about, you know, do you envision tighter integration with CorePoint as well, and with multiple non-integrated EMRs where CorePoint is the only link? This integration that you were speaking with earlier, that's your vision for CorePoint?
Yes, for both products, both for CorePoint and for Rhapsody. Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think, you know, another way to really make what my favorite part about bringing sort of a story to life is to hear how other people, other providers and healthcare organizations are using the technology. So we talked about why Lineate really saw value in NextGate, and we teed up a couple of customers to talk about why they see value in NextGate. And so, Danny, I know you're super familiar with these two, Axia and Geisinger, and it'd be great to kind of hear your perspective of why they chose Lineate why they chose NextGate by
Yeah,
Lineate.
but
And
it's yeah.
yeah.
So actually, it's an interesting one because it was late last year before we had really begun in earnest to talk about the merger, and so I recall being on the phone with the folks at Axia describing our solution and why why we felt that we were a good fit for their needs. And the main thing that I recall coming out of those conversations was that our product provided a lot of visibility that they didn't have in their existing EMPI solution at the time. And that's something that I do hear pretty often with folks that are coming from either a homegrown solution for patient ID management or using another product, because we really have invested a tremendous amount of time. I can think of all the design sessions we've had over the years in figuring out how do we represent this very, very complex environment that most of our customers have in the simplest way possible. And we really tried to optimize things when it came to the task management and such, to get as few clicks as possible to allow administrators to rifle through as many records as they can, because with the scope of this stuff, it's sometimes just kind of crazy to think about the number of millions and tens of millions of records that are running through this thing. So for them, if I recall, one of the main drivers was that visibility in terms of what does our data look like, why were these records matched, why were these records not matched. And I tend to look at these things as kind of like the black box of an airplane. You tend to, no one's staring at the glass and looking at this stuff 24/7. But when records come along that cause some sort of a problem in terms of the matching, or there are inconsistencies in the data that came from some source, you're trying to figure out why is the last name in the first name field and vice versa or whatever, then it's very helpful. And I think that was certainly one of the main things that I recall playing into that decision.
That makes and they're also growing. Like as they grow more, they need a way to they need to be confident they're engaging their patients.
Yes.
In a consistent way. I mean, I remember
Yeah.
hearing about them that they've kind of grown really rapidly through M&A.
Right. And we do have a good track record for very large deployments. That tends to be our sweet spot for larger deployments. Sometimes when I hear of data sets of 5,000 or 10,000 patients, then I say, well, you could use us, but it's kind of like taking a 747 to the grocery store. It's a little bit, it's a bit much. We are, having said that, we are trying to provide solutions as well that do scale down. So we're kind of used to trying to scale up. Oh, can you handle 100 million records? Can you do this national thing? But at the same time, there's also a lot of kind of smaller projects. So we're trying to create like a smaller 747, if you will, that could fit within the budget of some of these smaller customers. But absolutely, this was also one of their concerns. And having a vision for the future of patient engagement was another key piece. So we have been talking quite a lot with all of our prospects to tell them this is our vision of the future. We feel that the way that we're going to give you the kind of accuracy that you're looking for and access to your patient that you're looking for is going to be through verifiable credentials and digital identity. I'm sorry, you had already gone to the next. So
No, I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to. That was accident really, but I like that. So they bought it. They liked the vision that you.
Universally, I've heard yes, and I think it's one of those things that we're a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of talking about this. This is all still pretty, if you look across, not even healthcare, you look at other sectors, digital identity is still kind of a very nascent state. I hope within the next 5 years, we'll be able to have credentials on our phone that will allow us to travel to the airport and not have to worry, oh, did I bring my driver's license or did I leave it in my shorts? So these kind of things, it's, we're gonna get to that point, and we want to make sure that when the world gets to that point that healthcare is in the right place where it needs to be to utilize that and not be 20 years behind as it seems to perpetually be.
Yeah, we've had this come up a couple times in the webinar, the democratizing data stewardship, and that when we say that, it's really kind of bringing the consumer into the data stewardship. And your example of leaving your wallet at home when you're at the gym, I have found personally coming out of the last over the last 2 years, I left the house less, and I also when I left the house took less
Yeah,
content with me, right?
right,
Like I didn't carry a purse anymore. I sort of carry just essentials of identity. And now I've
yes,
gotten
right,
so used to the QR code and paying for things on my phone. It's
right,
super jarring when that's not available. And so
right,
I feel like
right,
this a
right.
big
And that's this whole kind of consumerization of healthcare that's rapidly happening. And we need to be in the right, we need to be able to provide our customers the right tools and capability and infrastructure, just like we're talking with the integration, we're talking about the EMPI patient repositories. This is going to be a key piece of infrastructure that's needed to enable the use of that kind of stuff, so that you don't have to carry around your insurance card or memorize your own ID or have people look you up and then say, well, I can't find you on the system and whatever. It's just, yeah, we don't want
It's
to be
very
there.
exciting.
Yeah,
Well,
it
now
is.
I will move to the next one. And as I do that, I'm thinking you mentioned when we were
Mhm.
preparing that Geisinger's was like one of the first customers. They've been a
Yeah,
long customer, and
yeah.
I wanted to take that made me want to remind people in the audience, like if there's someone that you were working with before, you should expect to continue working with them. And so,
Yeah.
your way to reach out to people or who you're reaching out to, hopefully, you don't feel any disruption there
No,
for folks in the
no. And
audience.
whoever was in the audience that might have been working with me, reach out to me.
Yeah.
And I still have a Dan Sedone at NextGate. It just gets forwarded. And so now it's Danny.Sedone at Lineate. So yeah, that's the
Nice.
only change. No, Geisinger, we started with Geisinger the mid 2000s, back when we were just a small group. And this has always been an organization that was forward thinking. And for a little company that we were, they took a gamble on us to install our EMPI, and we've been there ever since. And we've learned a lot from them. A lot of our initial designs for our user interface came from Geisinger, and we continue to evolve them. They're very much a part of our user group when we present new solutions, and they're very forthright in terms of telling us, they're not going to work. You're going to need to do it again. So, I think having customers like that is really fantastic. We've started to work with them on referential data over the last back in 2021 to help resolve some of their ambiguous data using third-party information. And we're looking this year at some of the other initiatives that really around the patient engagement. So we're hoping that we can convince them to take a gamble on that as well, just like they did back in the very beginning. Because, like I said, they're an organization that does look forward, and we're very proud to have worked with them over the years.
And you mentioned that they're a large Epic customer,
Yeah.
and they're really connecting the health plan, the provider system, and the local HIE.
There's so at this point, yes, we are in these various entities in the HIE, the regional exchange, the Geisinger Health System, and also the Geisinger Health Plan. There is perhaps in the next year or two the possibility that we will link some of these things together. We have done this for some of our larger customers where they've had independent EMPIs for kind of specific regions or specific purposes, and we've federated that into a centralized EMPI that allows them to have kind of a complete view of the entire ecosystem. So we're hoping to do that as well. So stay tuned. But yes, we are in these various elements of their system.
Oh, and are they, you mentioned stringent governance policies. How do they
Oh,
think about
yeah.
reference data, or what are
Well,
they bringing other sources?
when we started with them, I mean, this is really an organization that takes patient safety and the accuracy of their data extremely seriously. This was a great test bed for us because our starting point was, if everything doesn't match, we don't want you to link anything, and we had to kind of walk away from that point and say, well, statistically speaking, you're going to be okay if it says Dan versus Danny. It's not a big deal, and so a lot of our rule sets, in terms of trying to detect members of a household, detect twins, to prevent these sorts of linkages that shouldn't be links. We did a lot of work with them in that area, and they have very stringent data governance policies. When we started to introduce the idea of reference data, this was another kind of learning experience for us, because the idea of reference data, and maybe I'll try to keep it short because maybe we've gone a little bit long on time, but
so easy.
we're still okay. So the idea of reference data is, maybe there's information in the credit bureaus that has some history that the organization doesn't have. So while our EMPI is always collecting history, like what were your last addresses, your last phone numbers, there are cases when, especially when we're starting up a system net new, that we don't have access to whatever history may have been there for the patient, or maybe the patient just recently moved into the area. So the use of reference data, that's kind of the concept. We have implemented a solution that makes those call outs automatically to a reference data provider, one of the credit bureaus. But we learned in this experience with Geisinger, we have to be extremely careful with that as well. So not every record is eligible for a lookup. The record has to be populated fairly well to begin with, because otherwise you're just matching on just name and birth date is just asking for trouble. And then there's a lot of rules to ensure that we use that reference data in alignment with the existing policies that the organization has. So that's the way that we look at reference data, and that's what all of our implementations are. And again, it was a good learning experience with them in terms of how to use it.
Awesome. Well, we are at time. I want to be respectful for the audience. It's been extremely interactive. Thanks so much for all the questions. And Danny, really, really thoughtful presentation and discussion with you. Thank you for joining. There are a couple of questions I can see just coming in that we will not get to during the session, but we will follow up with you directly afterward. And so thanks again, everyone, and we'll talk to you next month. Bye.
All right, bye all.